Bernard de Montreal 22b. The jealousy. On jealousy. There is no greater trap for the ego than this counterfeiting of love, which in fact is not love, but possession of the other, because it keeps alive the fear of being alone. Jealousy opts without letting anyone know, so that one can take care of oneself, even at the cost of not being perfectly loved. Jealousy is the height of the undisclosed despair created in the one who truly believes he loves, the vanity of his desire, that is, the vanity of believing that he or she is indispensable to the life of the other. The one who is jealous in love is in fact only worried about himself, about his possibilities. But jealousy is not only found in love, it is also found in the passion for things, where we discover the competition of egos. The success of one can lead to jealousy in the other, but another category of jealousy that does not belong so much to feelings as to attitudes, such as envy. Envy is a kind of jealousy that manifests itself in itself, but remains silent, hidden deep inside itself, and whose face rarely appears in the feelings of life. The desire wants to copy the other, it wants to breastfeed itself by its irreconcilable desires, with the life of itself, of what the other has been able to give birth to the possibilities of its own life. If we return to jealousy in the feeling of love, this flower of childish love, of love without power, because devoid of intelligence and common sense, we see that it causes in the person who is the bearer, an endless series of feelings and thoughts, which add their presence to a kind of desire, to create between the one who feels he really loves and the other, a tension, a kind of psychological rejection, in order to attract by this bluff, the person by whom one wants to be loved at all costs. If jealousy exceeds normality, it ceases to be simply a feeling without reason, to become a kind of major fault, in the general tone of the temperament. And with time it is taking shape more and more, to become the proper mark of this personality that can no longer live alone, that is, without the help that the other can provide, the object of false love. Even if love is sincere or even great, it cannot be real, because it is made of weakness, and this counterfeiting of love can only end in failure, because the soul always uses the weaknesses of the ego to make it suffer, to make it evolve, so that it can evolve and record more and more a variety of experiences related to this suffering. If the ego, the planetary man, knew the laws of the soul, he would easily see that he is only a robot portrait in the evolution of the soul, and as long as he remains a robot portrait, he cannot be cosmic, that is to say, free from the conditions imposed on him by the soul in order to raise in him experiences that will serve other planes of life, other beings who will come in some future to inhabit a material body. And the circus of life continues until the day when man understands that everything that comes from him and makes him suffer comes from a lack of intelligence and will. Look at those who suffer from jealousy and you will discover a lack of intelligence and will, which in popular parlance can be called common sense. Jealousy, in fact, is a vibration that penetrates the mind and emotions of man and subjects him to a variety of emotions and thoughts, which make him a puppet, not of the other, but of himself, and this himself is never real but fictional, that is to say that he gives himself the appearance of his feeling to prevent himself from facing the music of life, the music that sings him the reality of his situation, if only he would listen and hear it. But no, he doesn't want to listen, because he knows too well that he would have to go further in his experience, and this requires strength, character, will and intelligence. Jealousy is all the more difficult to overcome than the victim, who does not very often realize that the very condition of his life, with regard to the other, creates this situation, and that the other is no less infected, although he is not affected to the same degree. The one who suffers from jealousy does not realize that there are aspects in him, which create setbacks for the other, and it is only in the deepening of this study of oneself that one can and must understand why the other lives in a setback with regard to oneself. But jealousy is not always ardent, often sometimes it is hidden behind the veiled, unspoken fear of losing the one you love to another or someone greater than yourself, in some field of experience. And this kind of jealousy, reinforced by the insecurity of oneself, towards other beings who can come into contact with the one we love, creates a kind of insecurity in oneself that can become sick in the long run, especially if one realizes for fictional reasons that one does not have the necessary material, that one discovers in the experience of the great conquests. The one who suffers from jealousy does not suffer so much from not being loved, as he would like to be, but from his inability to free himself from his sincere feeling, based on a false love, that is to say a love that he cannot live, because he is not present, that is, it is only the reflection of a mirage that his desire wants to maintain in the field of life, whereas life is only a field of experience, that only will and real intelligence can furrow and plow at the same time. If man lived in supramental intelligence and will, he would very quickly see through the veils imposed by the soul and disengage himself without constraint from the pains caused by a love based on weakness. He would easily see that jealous love is not real love, although he is sincere, and he would understand that sincerity is the astral color of emotion and is not necessary where there is intelligence and real will. He would see that the conscious being does not need sincerity to love, since conscious love is not based on a man's feeling for the woman, but on the bond of their minds, and the agreement between their minds and the mutual feelings they have for each other and the affection of their lives. For in fact, where there is conscious love, there is no affection and no feeling, for affection is the intelligent nature of love, whereas feelings is the astral, planetary nature of love. Where there is a feeling of love, there is a discovery of oneself and a search for the other, to facilitate this discovery. Whereas in the affection of love there is only detachment from oneself towards the other, in order to make him feel the presence of love, that is, the presence of one's mind, which binds to the mind of the other through the emotional and intelligent demonstration of conscious love. But men are not nearly universally at this experience of conscious love, for they still have too much to learn from the feeling of love, the false feeling in love and the false feeling of love, which prevents one being from loving another being without possessing it in any way. To love consciously, one must benefit from internal intelligence, from this intelligence that enlightens, but does not dull for any reason whatsoever, because it is free from the passions of the ego, from the feelings of the ego. Jealousy gives the person affected a feeling of not being felt in his love for the other, and this is a trap, because although this is true, there is still a missing element that prevents the union of the two beings, and this missing element, perhaps not expected because it is already not part of the life plan of the couple who suffer in love. Then it only remains to be realized that if there is a missing element that raises this passion in a party, it must raise its gaze beyond the emotional limit that it creates for itself, in order to go further in the search for the desired and desirable balance. But too often those who suffer abnormally from jealousy, condition themselves to their condition and suffer from it for long periods of time, because they do not have the inner will and intelligence developed enough to redirect their lives and restabilize them in a new context. These people risk losing everything, because where jealousy brings suffering, it does not create happiness either. It is not useful for the jealous man or woman to maintain hope or bitterness, because these two aspects of pain can only lead to failure. Life is a confrontation between emotion and intelligence, and more often than not emotion is the winner. But if intelligence manifests itself above emotion, it pierces it and destroys its uselessness, that kind of uselessness that serves the evolution of the soul well, but destroys man, the ego. And as long as man has not stopped talking about the ancient conceptions of unconscious and suffering life, he will not be able to benefit from what he is, that is, from what he can be when he is in the power of intelligence and the higher will in him. From this light that illuminates everything, even the dark paintings, painted by the emotionality and insecurity of the ego. As long as jealousy gnaws, it destroys the fibers of will and weakens the light of intelligence in the being, so that with time, analysis, reasoning and all subtle forms of stupidity, will come to the aid of a being exhausted in intelligence and weak in will. Man is on the material plane to live and not to die, to live well and not to suffer. But intelligence and will are so much above himself that only his emotionality reigns, and only his pitiful loneliness succeeds in giving him the subsistence of a life to which he is only entitled out of weakness. The being who becomes conscious must break the chains of his illusions, his great and good false feelings, especially those who feel sincerity to excess and who kill his life, because the being no longer has the will, nor the intelligence of life as it should be lived. Are jealous those who have not understood that the centered, conscious man does not need the feeling of being loved to live, unless he is truly loved. And a being who is truly loved cannot suffer from jealousy, because the cause is no longer there, but if there is a cause it is uprooted and not masked as one does for a plaster wall where the crack already appears. It may be said that the wall has been repaired, but a repaired wall is never like a wall in perfect condition. And many people live a love that is constantly being repaired. And they wonder, foolishly, why the fresh air continues from time to pass through the crack. But the jealous being does not know intelligence, he only knows his sincere love, but on all his love based on the insecurity of his life. Why? Because the will and true intelligence have not yet been realized in him. Jealousy has a face that hides maneuvers that can easily freeze in guilt the one who is the victim. Often the jealously loving being will threaten his partner, in order to bring him closer to himself, and these threats of all kinds can easily reach a partner weak in will and intelligence. Guilt will easily fall on the board of his diminished feelings, and the game can risk dragging on for the sake of the two hostages of weakness. But like everything else, jealousy is healed, for anyone who wants to, and one of the best remedies is the realization that if you are not loved as an equal, you must not waste your time, your energy, and live with hope and delusion. You have to get up and walk, move forward, and never look back again. We soon realize that the world is full of beings who offer themselves to love, better than the one we left behind. And life begins again. But this is not easy to live with, because loving without being loved in return, affects us so much in our own love, that the ego does not want to admit it, does not want to face the game of life. You think you're losing and you don't want to lose, and it's precisely here that you really lose. Because in life you have to lose something to gain something else. It is a law of life, until the day when it fills with intelligence and real will, one can no longer lose, because one is no longer attached to anything which is worth possessing or losing, even the love of a being. Because finally, the love of one being for another is only an exchange, and if exchange there is, time is better, but if exchange there is not, too bad, we get up and walk further. That's life. The misfortune of jealousy is the enormous loss of emotional energy experienced by the unloved one, and this loss of energy only worsens with time, because the unloved one will always be unloved, and this loss of energy cannot be balanced because it dominates the most sensitive and weakest part of man, the heart, which leads to a loss of spirit, that is, of vital energy in the astral body. This reduces the vitality of the being and harms him because his possibilities are put in stop and his power to live diminished according to his attachment to weak love, which he has maintained for so long. Real love is strong, it is never weak, and if there is weakness in your love, it is not real love, it is the feeling of love already reached by rust that settles into jealousy. The balance between two beings cannot be reduced or destroyed, if love is located in the mind. But where love is located in feeling only, there is always the possibility of jealousy, because jealousy is the hallmark of love and feeling, since it is from poorly shaped feeling that it is born. Jealousy has a different effect on men than on women. The jealous man is wounded in his ego, and his pride bears the mark of it, for the man has always reserved for himself the right to possess, while the woman, who is jealous, is only jealous by omission of her right to possess. And if she is jealous, her suffering does not strike her in her pride, but in her right, in the sincerity of her love. Then the jealousy of the woman is much healthier and more reasonable than in the man, although it always remains a limit in his intelligence and his real will. While the jealous man intervenes with anger, the jealous woman intervenes with tears, and both beings are guilty of both lack of intelligence and real will. Although jealousy is normal in every reasonable and planetary being, it becomes unreasonable in every intelligent and voluntary being, because it does not depend on reality in man, but on the fictional, sincere or unreasonable according to your choice. Where jealousy takes hold deeply in a being, one should not seek to quarrel with him, for this affliction is great and profound. Above all, we must help him to understand and see clearly. Jealousy hinders the normal and natural development of the affected person's behavior, because it unknowingly destroys the will to unleash oneself. It is a vicious circle. Without will one cannot do anything, and jealousy destroys it. So how do we get out of this? Well, life takes care of it, because although one being is jealous, the other is also a victim, but in a different way, and it is often the other who will force the jealous to give in to the inevitable, to defeat. Then life will be dark for a while, but will start again in the near future. The jealous never see the dawn because his feeling of love betrayed takes away all the energy he needs to see a tomorrow. But although his weakness is equal to his lack of will, he must wake up one day, amazed at his liberation and overjoyed to have finally realized that he had been mad with pain. Jealousy will remain among men, as long as they have not understood that human love, planetary love, love of feelings and in feelings is skillfully measured by the gods, by the forces of the soul, and that this measure is always to the measure of intelligence and real will. As long as men are not in intelligence and real will, it is the soul in them that will dictate, without their knowledge, the measure of their suffering and the measure of their joy. That is why man must inevitably, in the course of the future evolution of humanity, completely transform his point of view. That is to say, its point of reference with regard to life and what it presents to it, in order to finally be able to intelligently and voluntarily transgress the ancient and astral laws of its social behavior. Otherwise he may remain on full footing in the shifting sand of experience and never leave it, for life as known to planetary man is not under his control, since a free will is one of his illusions. For man to live, he must die; for the experience to no longer serve him, he must be in intelligence and will and not in emotion and intellect. Jealousy is a profound study of man's morals and reveals that man in his jealousy is the laughing-stock of the gods, the forces of the soul, and none other than himself can emerge victorious from this theatrical circus where the beast, man, eats the beast, man. For in the phenomenon of jealousy, the jealous being feeds on the being who does not love him or loves him badly, and the one who loves him badly vomits the food that feeds the other. Such beings are both unhappy and causes unhappiness in their house, for everything in them and around them is poisoned. The poison does not improve and the outcome is hatred. Whether you hate weakness or rage, it is the same thing. The jealous one comes to hate because his love is no longer thought, he has rushed, he has turned into hatred, and the one who loved badly and sometimes felt guilty now only feels disgust, because he has seen during the experience that stalking destroys him, and wants to get out of the jealous love of the other. He realizes it's time to finally leave. Time fixes things and everything falls back into a new order. The jealous remains alone, licking his wounds, but not closing the door to a happier love, but remaining cautious in his expectation. The other could not believe his eyes, nor his ears, to have suffered so long to have been loved by a jealous man, while turning his back on the apotheosis of the other. That life is funny and apparently contradictory, don't believe it. There is no contradiction or absurdity in life, there is only the absence of intelligence and rule in man. If life created the three lower kingdoms in such harmony, why would there be contradiction or absurdity in the fourth? Is it the fault of human life or ignorance? The answer is written in your head, don't look for it in your heart, you may compromise it. Jealousy contains four vices, that is, it is made up of four elements that harm man: insecurity, hope, sincerity and feeling. These four elements, all from the perspective of supramental consciousness, define reason, Why is the jealous being an unhappy being? And why his misfortune must last, as long as he has not eliminated from his life these four elements, which conform to their rule of play, that is to say the decline of intelligence and will. Jealousy is not only a flaw in character, it also represents a constant contrition of man. A degeneration of his individuality, which leads him nowhere, since the jealous being can never live his love in partnership with the other, as equals, because the other does not love him. If a being wakes up one day and feels jealousy in him, it would be better for that being to stop for a moment and see himself in the other's mind and look coldly at whether the other is the cause or if he is the cause. And in both cases he will have to inform himself, because if he is the cause, the other will abandon him out of disgust. And if the other is the cause, he's already leaving it behind. Somehow or other, we'll have to open a new book and try it elsewhere and in a different way. Often the jealous being requires that the other person shows him some feelings in order to reassure him, but does he not realistically think that perhaps the other person's mind avoids such a serenade, because he feels that they are below the real meaning of his love, in the sense that he does not or does not feel the need to always have to prove that he loves, to reassure the one who is jealous. It's a waste of energy. A real love does not require serenading. These enchanting forms of love only serve to strengthen against time often somewhat weakened ramparts, and such fortifications, although temporarily comforting, for those who suffer from jealousy, do not represent any real security for him, because love is not ordered. Love between two beings is determined by forces above themselves, and it is only when they are in the intelligence of these forces, that their bonds become more and more a substance and define their future relationships. The jealous being constantly wants to be proven that the love of the other for him is intact. And this is unreal, because as long as man is not in the intelligence and will of his life, the latter will only be a field of experience used in all kinds of ways, in all the steps towards the perfection of his emotional and mental consciousness. We believe that we are alone on a material level, when our solitude, our identity, is only real when it is understood within the framework of the relationship with the intelligences that guide us, without us being able to consciously intervene in the understanding of their activities. It is then that we are alone, without being alone, because we no longer suffer from insecurity towards the other. When we penetrate the veil of our lives, we see very clearly that our jealousy came only from a lack of intelligence and will, and that our sincere love was only a means of making us suffer in our human condition. But man must one day free himself from his human condition and must see things as they are. He then realizes that even if he is not loved, it no longer matters as much, in that everything changes, everything is transformed, and that it is already time to look elsewhere, to see elsewhere, in order to continue without loss of energy, the path of life that we want to live consciously and not by habit. As long as the jealous being has not seen the stupidity of his jealousy, he will not be able to discover the key to life that can open the door of real love for him, because he will always be dominated by the four elements that allow jealousy to destroy in itself and in the other the possibility of being united in the spirit, that is, united beyond our character weaknesses. Man must understand that unconscious life on the globe is a domination, and that all experience emerges from this domination, and as long as he has not understood this, he must suffer this human condition. He must understand that intelligence and real will are the only pillars of earthly life, and that any maneuvers outside these two principles can only bring bitterness to him, whatever reasoning or feeling he may wish to bring. Jealousy being the great disease of love, it is also one of man's great diseases, because it stems from his weakness, from his lack of real individuality, and serves to strengthen his feeling of sincerity. Man must recognize the importance of his will and his intelligence, in the face of the experience that must be overcome so that he can be free, in himself and in the other. Jealousy is keeping him in man, as long as he is not aware of it, of his madness to love, that is, of his madness to love badly and to be badly loved, that is, of his madness to have to be loved, in order to be himself. This is the height of the absurdity of the man's feeling towards the woman or vice versa, because instead of making these beings great towards each other, they diminish them in their status since they no longer have power by themselves. Jealousy exists because man is afraid to be alone, and his solitude is fictitious because man is never alone, but the price of discovering its reality cannot be fixed by jealousy, because it weakens his intelligence and blocks the emotional energy that must be released, in order to allow intelligence to enlighten the experience and reposition it, in a real setting, so that the jealous being alters his egocentric behavior, to adopt a centrism that is resistant to any experience where insecurity is the daughter of fear and the fear of being alone. Two loving beings together may not build if one of them does not like it. It is simply that the experience must be rectified or take another direction. Supramental consciousness disengages man from his smallness of mind, producing from a conditioned and subjective emotional state to a trapped personality. This great consciousness opens man to himself, so that he can no longer be blinded by the mechanisms that affect his reality and diminish that reality. That is to say, vital in relation to another, that if there is an equal exchange, any other contract is a mortification and only serves the experience of the soul, at the expense of the ego, but it is the ego that must dominate life and not the soul. It is the conscious ego that has power over life and not the unconscious ego. And consciousness means, active union of intelligence and supramental will. Beings who live by human love can never know cosmic love or real love, because their feelings will always work against the true meaning of life. They will always be sad, because unconscious life has no permanent joy and any unreal happiness is temporary.